Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Hello, it is Sunday, September 18th. Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Good evening, I'm Stephanie GUADIAN. Starting today, President Barack Obama is declaring this week Prescription Opioid and Heroin Epidemic Awareness Week. Opioids are the drugs at the heart of a crisis that has cost 165,000 Americans their lives just since 2000. Abuse of the pain pills has pushed countless more to crippling addiction. And for the next half hour, we are going to take a close look at addiction to painkillers, the dangers, treatment, and the role some believe medical marijuana could play in bringing relief to those who are suffering. Remember, you can email us your comments and your questions right now to ABC7Extra at KVIA.com. You can also reach us by calling 915-496-1771, and on Twitter, just remember to use the hashtag ABC7Extra. The broadcast industry is also working to battle the opioid and heroin epidemic. The industry is now running TV and radio spots to bring awareness to the growing problem. Here's a look at one.
I took my first handful of pills, and that's when all my priorities seemed to change.
He would ask to use the bathroom in other people's homes.
He just assumed that they would have medication.
He'd go in their medicine cabinets and steal prescription drugs.
I wish I knew really what these prescription pills were.
We were so naive about the whole drug thing.
These are all synthetic forms of heroin.
Keep your medication locked up because you'll never notice that a pill is gone.
Mind your meds. Learn more from the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids.
This summer, the Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA, released a report outlining what the agency calls the expanding public health crisis afflicting America due to the use and abuse of heroin and other opioid drugs. DEA Acting Administrator Chuck Rosenberg said, "We tend to overuse words such as unprecedented and horrific, but the death and destruction connected to heroin and opioids is indeed unprecedented and horrific." He also added that the problem is enormous and growing, and all of our citizens need to wake up to these facts. I want to introduce my guest tonight. Dr. Oscar Perez with Sovereign Health Group was supposed to be with us here tonight, but he couldn't make it. But we do have Dr. Jose Villarreal with the Pain and Spine Center, and also New Mexico State Representative Bill McCamley. I want to thank you all for being with us late on this Sunday night. Bill, I want to start with you.
Sure.
How big of a problem is this for the state of New Mexico?
Well, this is a real huge problem in our state. So when you look at the folks that have died from prescription opioid overdoses, we were actually second in the nation. So more people died of this than when you combine auto accidents and homicides by gun combined. And that's a real issue. I think from what I understand last year, it was the #1 cause of accidental death in our state. And it's a really, really big problem. And you'll find folks that get a prescription for this for some kind of chronic pain or because they had surgery, they'll get addicted and they'll stay on it that way. You'll have sometimes, as your ad pointed out, a kid or some other family member will find these things in their relatives' medicine cabinets, start using it there, and then you get the real problem of black tar heroin, which is if I can't get a hold of these prescriptions anymore, I'll move to get heroin, which is, as he said, this is a synthetic form of heroin, so it's the same kind of high. I think the really important thing we've got to talk about here, though, is a shift in priorities and how we deal with the problem. Since 1971, Richard Nixon declared this war on drugs. We've been at it over 40 years. We spent $1 trillion fighting it by putting people in prison. You can't lock people up to solve this problem. And so we've really got to start looking at drug use and addiction as a public health issue.
Okay, let me stop you right there real quick. Back just a little bit. Doctor, I want you to tell me a little bit more about these opioids. What are they and how do people get addicted to them?
Well, opioids are a very powerful chemical that can slow the pain transmission in the nervous system. And there's really few things that we know of that work as well as opioids for pain.
And that's why they're prescribed, because they work.
And but the issue is that they can create a physical dependence and also a psychological addiction where you crave the euphoria you may get with certain compounds that we prescribe for pain. And With that, they start using it inappropriately for other reasons besides pain relief, and they get addicted.
And how often is this happening?
Well, I don't have the numbers in addiction versus how many prescriptions go out, and how the statistics on who gets addicted with appropriate pain treatments is very, very small in actuality. But there are unscrupulous clinics that prescribe pain medications inappropriately.
And in your opinion, are opioids being prescribed too often?
In some cases, yes. And I think we need to step back and look at why we prescribe them, assess the function of the patient, and get realistic goals as to what you're trying to accomplish in prescribing these and improving their function. And that's what we need to determine is function, not what a patient's pain relief they say it is on the scale per se. You need to reassess and make sure they're doing more activity, they're sleeping better, they're interacting, and that's something that pain clinics should be doing.
And Bill, you were saying that we need to maybe stop looking at the patient or the person who becomes addicted as someone who is doing a criminal behavior.
Yeah, I think that's really been one of the problems. We've decided as a society, since this whole war on drugs thing, that we're going to try to lock people up and solve the problem that way. And that's really not what has been proven to be effective. Like I said, the United States has spent over $1 trillion in taxpayer money since the early 70s trying to lock people up and do the whole criminalization of people that get addicted to drugs. And what we're seeing is, and this is the same thing with opioids, when you've got some of the methadone, what's it called,
The Suboxone?
Yeah, Nexaboxone. I mean, you've got some medicines that can really help people get off of this if you work at it from a public health perspective. So you can work on counseling, you can work on getting medicine instead of locking people away. I do also want to send a shout out to Joe Moody, who's actually one of the state representatives here in El Paso, who's been working really hard in the Texas legislature on decriminalization and medical use of cannabis, which we'll talk about later, but really shifting that focus away from saying, this is something we're going to criminalize, we're going to put you in jail for, to, hey, this is a problem, we're going to get you help. And I just want to say one more thing before we move on. This is such a huge issue for veterans. And since with a lot of the military bases in the borderland area, a lot of these guys and ladies are coming back from war zones. They've got PTSD, they've got chronic pain issues, and they get on this stuff, and it's really hard to get off. The VA estimates that of their patients, they have twice as many prescription opioid overdoses in the nation as the general population. And so as we talk about this, it's so important, especially for our veterans, that we really deal with this in a smart, strategic way, rather than just saying, throw everybody in jail.
Let me just add something to what he said, is that to make it clear is that a lot of patients can stay on opioids for many, many years without developing an addiction. An addiction is one of those aberrant behaviors where you're craving the medication for other reasons. And you alter your mental status, you're looking at it for euphoria, and your functionality actually decreases instead of increasing, as is our goal as pain physicians.
Yeah, and we're here to talk about those folks tonight who do become addicted to it, because it is happening a lot. You know, they're calling this a public health crisis. Give us some signs that if there are people out there who maybe family members are on opioids, or they are, what are some signs that you could be getting into trouble?
If they're running out of medication sooner than what we determined, for instance, in our clinic, we try to do pill counts to make sure that the counts equal to what we're prescribing. If they're going to other doctors for the same symptoms, and they're getting more and more prescriptions for
And
other
is that
patients.
happening? Can you get pain meds from one doctor and then just turn around, go to another doctor and start over?
You can, but now there's pharmacy registries that the physician should look at to make sure that the patient isn't getting prescriptions from other doctors. The problem is there's not a lot of crosstalk between the states. For instance, I have to look at Texas and New Mexico locally, and they be coming from Arizona too, and you need to look at those registries. So hopefully it all becomes centralized so that we can see it in one database.
So have you found yourself at a point where you've had to tell a patient, we're not going to name names, but you can't take this anymore, we have to find you an alternative? And if so, what alternatives are out there?
Well, it depends what the problem is, but there's non-medicinal ways to curtail pain. There's neurostimulation, which is a device that can improve chronic back pain in many individuals. There's adjuvant medications used for nerve pain that we can deal with, and sometimes just cognitive and behavioral therapy or physical therapy.
And do you have to have mental health therapy at that point as well?
We refer to mental health professionals when they're available. There's a big shortage of that here, and I think that's what he's alluding to, is that I don't think there's enough treatment for a lot of those patients that need mental health support.
And you're referring back to the veterans coming home who may need mental health and instead are perhaps turning to these opioids?
Well, I think a lot of times these guys are coming back, you know, they've gotten hurt or they've gotten PTSD. And they're prescribed these opioids because it's easy, right? And they work. As you were saying, they're very, very effective. The problem that we see moving forward, though, is that the counseling resources aren't available, or the medicine resources aren't available, because it's so much easier to say, here's your opioids, or here's your prescription, knock yourselves out, go ahead. And it's a lot harder to say, okay, how do we address this in a more holistic manner? How do we say, in terms of addiction, let's really make sure that people are getting the counseling they need, the education they need, the assistance they need in getting off this stuff moving forward. And as we talked about earlier, the problem you get is you become addicted and you either continue to use these things as a prescription, you find them where you can, or you move to heroin. And once again, if we're not putting resources on the front end of saying, let's prevent these problems, and we're only trying to put people in jail later on.
After they become addicted.
It costs more, it's horrible to see people in jail. I mean, all of the societal problems just cascade like crazy. And so it's really, really important for us to say, okay, mental health is hard, and addiction is hard. These are not easy problems to deal with. There's no black and white solution. In fact, one of the articles I was reading today before I came here, a lot of times it's hard sometimes for doctors, because they say, okay, I'm helping these guys out, and they relapse. But that's part of the process a lot of times. But it still works better than just sending people to jail. And so that's really one of the things that a lot of us in the public sector are trying to shift in terms of this conversation. How do we really move forward and address this in a more holistic way? And I think we're going to be more effective that way.
Okay, well, we've got our first caller for tonight, and we encourage you to go ahead and call us and let us know what you're thinking. Let's go ahead and hear the caller.
I'm just calling to let you all know that as a epileptic seizure patient, it is better for me to medicate with medical marijuana than it is for me to take 3 or 4 different types of anti-seizure medication that leave me like a zombie all day. Plus, not only that, it completely diminishes my appetite. On the contrary, the medicinal marijuana helps me regain an appetite and be able to absorb and eat regularly and enjoy those times with my family.
All right, well, thank you very much for calling. I promise I'm going to get to the medical marijuana in just a minute. But first, doctor, I want to ask you, what are some of the negative effects of these opioids? What can they have on patients?
Well, there's a lot we don't know, but we think there's a certain opioids that may have a certain stimulation on some of the receptors that create addiction, the dopamine receptor, the craving, and you can get sedation, nausea, depression, hormonal imbalances with decreases in testosterone for men, loss of sleep.
So what about folks who do take this for years and years? Don't they build up a tolerance to it?
I think a lot of tolerance is overstated. There is some degree of tolerance, but the way we manage it is by using sustained release acting agents versus the quick ones. The ones that you take and give you rapid plasma levels, such as the hydrocodone or the quick-acting oxycodones, those tend to create a lot more tolerance than the slow-acting long-term ones. And the way we manage tolerance is actually, if we really see somebody increase in their doses, we start decreasing it instead of 20 years ago when I first came out into practice, that's what the practice was, to keep escalating the dose. But
If they thought they needed more.
right. Now, with the prescription drug abuse problem, and we now have better studies, we now know how to manage that better.
Okay, but what about if someone is taking one of these strong opioids and then they also go to their doctor, maybe a veteran, but plenty of other people too, who have anxiety, and then they're prescribed an anxiety pill? Is there any danger in taking the combination?
Yeah, the benzodiazepines, such as Xanax, Valium, those can slow your respirations down and compound that with the opioids do that as well. So that has to be taken into consideration. And in our practice, we monitor that. So a lot of times we're not aware of it, and we take urine screens, and sometimes we find 3 or 4 anti-anxiety drugs in them along with opioids. So that's when we start counseling and finding out why they're taking these, and contact the physicians if we need to, who are prescribing them.
Could it be a deadly combination?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay, all right.
Now,
So
but there is people that can be functional on both, but I think benzodiazepines for anxiety are overprescribed as well. It's not just an opioid problem.
okay, so that again, that's why it's so important to tell your doctor everything that you are taking.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to be talking more about medical marijuana as a possible option for pain relief. Remember, we're taking your comments and your questions. You can call our comment line 496-1771, and if you're online right now, you can email us ABC-7 Extra at KVIA.com, and you can always tweet me at @GUADIAN ABC-7. Just remember to use the hashtag ABC-7 Extra. Stay with us.
That is a pretty good breakfast. You're not even eating.
Not hungry.
No? Why not? What's up?
Kath and I knew that Jenny had been partying a bit. Found out she tried heroin.
Most people don't know what to say about drugs, but we do. Visit us at drugfree.org.
And welcome back. That was another public service announcement that the broadcast industry is running right now to bring awareness to the growing problem of heroin and opioid abuse. The Associated Press and the Center for Public Integrity have teamed up to investigate the influence of pharmaceutical companies on state and federal policies regarding opioids. The news agencies tracked proposed laws and analyzed data on how the companies and how their allies deployed lobbyists and contributed to political campaigns. Among their findings, drug companies and allied advocates spent more than $880 million on lobbying and political contributions at the state and at the federal level. That is just over the past decade. The money covered a range of political activities important to the drug industry, including legislation and regulations related to opioids. In comparison, a handful of groups advocating for opioid limits, they spent $4 million. I want to welcome my guests again tonight. We were hoping to have Dr. Oscar Perez with the Sovereign Health Group. He couldn't make it tonight, but I do have Dr. Jose Villarreal with the Pain and Spine Center. Thank you very much. And also New Mexico State Representative Bill McCamley. Thank you both for staying up late and being with us tonight. The PSA that we just heard talked a little bit about heroin. And I think when parents hear heroin, it's very scary. But when maybe they hear opioids, it's not as scary. It's just considered sort of a pain medication. How close are the two?
Well, they're both opioids, and there, like I said earlier, there's a lot about opioids we don't understand on why some act a little differently than others. But heroin obviously has a lot more addiction, where the cravings really go up on those patients, and they take it in escalating doses. And they're just looking for that feeling of the high.
Yeah. And this is something that is very easy for kids, for young adults, teenagers to get their hands on from their parents or maybe a friend's house, their parents. Have you experienced that?
Yes. We come in with, we've had patients that say their teenage grandson got a hold of the medication.
And maybe they don't even realize it for some time.
Correct.
But they also are at danger of becoming addicted? Those teens and the young people?
Yes. Yeah. You know, they take them, they sell them in high school, whatever.
Mm-hmm. And it could really then, maybe if they can't get their hands on their parents' drugs anymore, then they may actually turn to things out on the street.
Right.
Let's talk first about treatment options for folks who do find themselves addicted to the opioids. What is your first, your plan? What do you try to do?
Well, if I identify that they have a problem with it, I inform the patient I will no longer be able to prescribe that medication. And a lot of patients are worried about withdrawals, and withdrawals can occur, but however, they're not life-threatening. They feel terrible, but they're not life-threatening, and that's the reality. But we'd like them to get into a treatment program to combat their addiction problems. The problem is that the patient has to take the initiative. We can only make the recommendation, can't force them into that. So a lot of it has to come from the patient themselves, realizing that they have a problem and taking the steps to try to help themselves.
Meanwhile, though, they may still be in some sort of pain. And Bill, you say that there might be another alternative out there that could help some folks.
Well, in New Mexico there is. And so for the last, I think, 10 or 12 years, New Mexico has allowed patients with, we have very specific rules regarding our medicinal cannabis program. So we were talking over the break, and in California it's really easy. You can go to a doctor and say, you know, something's not working and get a prescription. In New Mexico, you have to have one of 16 different very specific medical problems. We're talking cancer, long-term PTSD, long-term chronic pain, glaucoma, these sorts of things. But we now have over 20,000 people in the state of New Mexico that have medical cannabis cards. And what they've found is it's very, very effective, especially with a lot of
El peligro no siempre tiene cara de peligro. Las drogas llegan a tus hijos de quien menos esperas.
And that was a Spanish public service announcement being put out by the broadcast industry to help fight drug abuse. Now, to be fair, we want to include a response by the industry group Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America in response to the study findings that I mentioned earlier tonight. We and our members stand with patients, providers, law enforcement, policymakers, and others in calling for and supporting national policies and action to address opioid abuse. Want to continue talking with our guests. I promised that I was going to get your take on the medical marijuana. What do you think of that as a possible alternative?
Well, I think there's a lot of talk about it, but it's not coming from the medical community. It's coming mainly from politicians and other people who really want to see it legalized for a variety of other reasons. But within the medical community, you don't see a big push for it because we don't have the data to support its efficacy. There's 120 active substances in marijuana. It could vary from plant to plant. So what exactly are we ingesting? What are the long-term effects? What's the toxicity data? We can't even test when somebody is high, what the levels are before they become mentally impaired. And so our function as physicians for pain is to improve function. I'm not going to want a surgeon cutting on me if they just took a hit of marijuana, or have a judge sit on the bench and do critical decisions who just did marijuana. But I have patients who are under good pain treatments who are able to do those tasks.
Okay, I think we have a caller who is going to be talking about the medical marijuana, so let's go ahead and listen in.
I don't know about the medical marijuana, but Dr. Villarreal has done miracles with me, I suffered post-traumatic stress, not only military, but also as a police officer fighting against illegal contraband and illegal drugs. He knows my whole history. I've gone through the whole gamut, and he got me off of opioids onto a different type of non-opioid, which helps me a lot. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for calling one of your former or current patients. So it is possible.
I didn't set that up.
Yeah, it is possible though to be successful in coming off an addiction to these opioids.
Oh, yes, most definitely. And our job as pain doctors, our goal is not to make them addicted by any means.
It's to ease pain.
It's to ease pain.
Let me just cut in there. I just really want to say, I understand that there's been a series of treatments that have happened over time. What we've seen, though, in New Mexico is, as we talked about, there are 20,000 people with medicinal cannabis cards, and these are folks with real issues. You can hear testimony after testimony after testimony of people with pain, of people with cancer, of people with PTSD. I have so many veterans talk to me and say, this is a lifesaver. And I actually was in Albuquerque, 3-4 days ago, and we heard from a person who said, I was on the Percocet and I was on the Valium. This is what they just give me when I get back. I was able to get on the medical cannabis, and it was so good for me moving forward to be able to get off these things. And I think you're starting to see the studies. I think it's a fair point the doctors made in that we haven't had a lot of long-term studies because it's only been legal for a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. But I think as the data comes in, as we see the efficacy, as we see more and more people that they're using this as a safe alternative, and that's the other thing too. I mean, you wouldn't want someone drunk working on you either, but we make alcohol legal, and we just say, hey, don't be drinking when you're on the job. And I think the same thing happens with cannabis. If you're using it medicinally and it's working for you at nighttime before you go to bed, you're not high when you go to work tomorrow, it's not really affecting anything. And it's been a safe, something that has really worked in our state. It's working in other states. And I think as more and more areas of the country look into this, and it becomes legal, and the asteroid doesn't come down and destroy the world, we see that there's a lot of positive aspects of it. I think it's something we just really have to be looking at the data and be realistic, and not just taking this 1950s reefer madness, drugs are bad attitude about it moving forward.
I'm all for looking at prospective studies and put it into the same rigors as any other drug is through the FDA approval process, but we're anointing it as an automatic panacea.
You just want to see more studies.
We just don't see, we don't have the data.
Final thoughts I want you to address a little bit in case people are out there watching and they're thinking, wow, I may know somebody, or I may be addicted to the opioids. Where do they go to start getting help? Do they go to their doctor? Do they go to a mental health physician? What is the first step?
I would say contact your doctor, tell them you have the problem, and then find the resources through there. There's several rehab clinics in this community and in New Mexico, and some of them take patients emergently. So, all
right, I want to thank you both. We're out of time, but you have just been a wealth of information. Thank you
for having us. Really appreciate
for being
it.
on tonight.
Great. Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
And thank you for watching. Have a great week ahead. Bye-bye.